In the vast, silent theater of eternity, where stars are born from dust and light itself learns to dance, there are stories whispered on the cosmic winds. These are tales of humanity, etched into the very fabric of existence. Tonight, we listen to one such echo, a story of a faith so profound, it dared to question the heavens and, in doing so, touched the face of the divine. This is the story of Abraham and the ultimate test. Before empires rose and fell, before scriptures were written in ink, there lived a man named Abraham. He was not a king, nor a conqueror of lands. He was a shepherd, his wealth counted in flocks and his kingdom stretching only as far as his shadow fell at dusk. Yet in his heart, he held a treasure far greater than any earthly crown, a covenant with God. This was a promise, a sacred thread of light connecting his mortal soul to the infinite. God had spoken to Abraham in the stillness of the desert night, promising him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the seashore. For years this promise seemed like a distant dream, a mirage shimmering on the horizon of his and his wife Sarah's old age. They waited, their youth fading like the setting sun, their hope a flickering candle against the winds of time. But the divine keeps its word, not in the time we expect, but in the time that is right. And so, Isaac was born, a child of laughter, a miracle wrapped in flesh and blood. Isaac was more than a son, he was the living embodiment of God's promise. Every laugh that echoed in their tent, every small hand that clasped Abraham's finger, was a note in a divine symphony. He was the sunrise after a long dark night, the proof that faith, even when stretched thin, does not break. Abraham's love for his son was as deep and vast as the desert itself. In Isaac he saw the future, the fulfillment of a holy pact, the dawn of a great nation. He was the heart of Abraham's world, the anchor of his soul. Then, the silence of heaven was broken. A voice, familiar and absolute, came to Abraham. It was the same voice that had promised him the stars, but now, its words were a tempest that threatened to shatter his world. "Take your son," the voice commanded, "your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Imagine the weight of those words. A command that defied all logic, all love, all understanding. It was a paradox wrapped in a thunderclap. The giver of life was now asking for life to be taken. The source of the promise was demanding the destruction of its fulfillment. How could this be? The night that followed must have been the longest of Abraham's life. Every star in the sky, once a symbol of a boundless future, now seemed like a cold, distant eye, watching him in his silent agony. Did he cry out? Did he bargain with the shadows? The scriptures are silent, leaving us only with the crushing gravity of his choice. His heart, a battlefield of love and devotion, was torn. On one side stood Isaac, the son of his old age, the warmth of his life, the tangible proof of God's faithfulness. On the other, the voice of God itself, the source of all being, the very definition of truth. To obey was to destroy the most precious gift he had ever received. To disobey was to sever the sacred bond that had defined his entire existence. It was a test not of obedience, but of ultimate trust. A question not of, "Will you do this for me?" but "Do you trust me, even when my command makes no sense? Even when it leads you into the deepest darkness?" At the first light of dawn, a decision had been made. Abraham rose. There was no hesitation in his movements, only a profound, chilling stillness. He saddled his donkey, took 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the offering, the sound of the axe echoing the splintering of his own heart. Then, he set out for the place God had told him about. For 3 days, they journeyed, 3 days of walking under the silent gaze of the sun, 3 days of shared meals and quiet footsteps. What passed between father and son on that long walk? What stories were told? What silences were shared? We can only imagine Abraham, looking at his beloved son, his heart breaking with every step, yet his face a mask of resolute calm. He was walking towards an act that would either prove him to be the most faithful of all men or the most tragically mistaken. He was caught between the promise of yesterday and the command of today, walking a tightrope of faith over an abyss of despair. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the mountain in the distance. He turned to his servants. "Stay here with the donkey," he said, his voice steady. "The boy and I will go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. We will come back." In that single extraordinary phrase lies the depth of Abraham's faith. Even as he walked toward the sacrifice, a part of him held on to the belief that God would provide, that the story would not end in tragedy. It was a whisper of hope in the heart of a storm. As they ascended the mountain, just father and son, Isaac, carrying the wood upon his small shoulders, turned to Abraham. His voice, innocent and pure, cut through the heavy air. "Father," he asked. "Yes, my son," Abraham replied, his own voice perhaps catching in his throat. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac observed, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" The ultimate question, the one that had been screaming in Abraham's own soul for 3 agonizing days. He looked at his son, the embodiment of his love and God's promise, and answered with words that have echoed through millennia. "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering." My son, was this a prophecy, a desperate prayer? Or was it the purest expression of faith ever uttered? A declaration that even in this final, terrifying moment, his trust in the giver of the promise remained unshaken. They reached the summit. There, under the vast, empty sky, Abraham built an altar. He arranged the wood, his hands moving with a practiced, sorrowful grace. Then, in the most heartrending act of all, he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. The miracle child, the promised heir, now lay bound upon the pyre. Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife. He raised it, its cold blade glinting in the sun, a final, terrible testament to his surrender. The universe held its breath, and in that sliver of a second, between the intent and the act, a voice ripped through the silence. Abraham, Abraham. It was an angel of the Lord, calling from heaven. Do not lay a hand on the boy. The voice commanded. Do not do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham lowered his arm, the knife falling from his grasp. His breath returned in a ragged gasp. He looked up, and there, caught in the thicket by its horns, was a ram. God had provided. The test was over. The promise was not broken, it was sanctified. The sacrifice was not Isaac, but Abraham's own will, his own understanding, his own attachment to the gift over the giver. On that mountain, Abraham was reborn. He had walked into the darkest night of the soul and emerged into a new dawn, his faith not just tested, but forged in divine fire, stronger and more radiant than ever before. This ancient story is not just a tale of a distant past, it is a mirror reflecting our own journey. We all have our own Moriahs, our own mountains of trial where we are asked to surrender what we hold most dear. It may not be a child, but a dream, a relationship, an identity, or our own carefully constructed plans for the future. Life, in its mysterious wisdom, often asks us to let go, to trust the process even when the path is shrouded in fog. The essence of Abraham's test is the question of faith in the face of the incomprehensible. Can we trust that there is a greater pattern at play, even when all we see is chaos? Can we believe in the sunrise while we are still in the darkest part of the night? True faith is not the absence of fear or doubt. It is the courage to walk forward anyway, to trust that the same force that brought us to the trial will also see us through it. It is the understanding that sometimes the greatest blessings are found on the other side of our greatest surrenders. Like Abraham, we are all wandering in a desert, guided by promises we can only feel in our hearts. And like him, we will be tested. But the story of Moriah teaches us that no test is given without a purpose, and that for every sacrifice demanded, a greater provision is waiting. The ram is always in the thicket. We need only to have the faith to lift our eyes and see it. The path of rebirth often leads through fire, but what emerges from the flames is a spirit that is purified, strengthened, and closer to the divine light than ever before. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story resonated with your spirit, consider subscribing to God Story Reborn for more tales of light and rebirth. May your faith be your guide, and may you always find your ram in the thicket. Peace be with you.